This Sunday marks the 100th anniversary of the beginning of the United Church of Canada from its three founding denominations, the Methodists, Presbyterians, and Congregationalists. 10 months ago, I started doing 1 decade at a time, 1 decade a month, looking at 4 elements: church life in the context of Canada's life, Indigenous connections, one publication the church wanted people to read, and a hymn written in the era. It became a bit of a passion project for me, and when I shared the first decade in September of the United Church in the context of Canada's life, 1925 to 35, a number of people came up to me and said, "You could just reuse those same slides for now, for the end of the year." And I've been thinking about that all year, because in new ways we're dealing with very similar problems that the challenges that the church saw 100 years ago. We are experiencing the legacy of a global pandemic. We are seeing raising racism and intolerance. We are still experiencing the fallout of Indian residential school catastrophe, of homelessness and global political divisiveness. And 100 years later, we are being called to meet the day in our own way with the resources, knowledge, and faith that we have now. Knowing how hard it is these days to face the daily challenges put before us, it gives me incredible gratitude for the courage, ingenuity, and hard work and faithfulness of all those people who have gone before us. When you're living through such demanding times, you don't always know what's at play. You do the best you can with the tools you have. And I have to confess, I have no idea what this present decade is about. But I do know it's stressful. And when I started to put together some touchstones, it felt like the times we're living in right now are characterized by action and reaction, by movement and pushback. In this present decade, Canada opened its doors to Syrian and Ukrainian refugees in large numbers. But in the midst of a growing affordability crisis and lack of available and reasonable housing, more voices called for fewer refugees. And some vocal anti-immigrant voices lost their national voice. In this era, about 7 million people died in the COVID pandemic, an estimated 60,000 in Canada. Scientists and epidemiologists around the globe raced to develop preventative vaccines as healthcare workers were overwhelmed and populations did not know how to keep safe. We celebrated and thanked nurses from our separated homes with banging pots in neighborhoods. We held graduations from home and school from home. We shopped alone or had items delivered. We wore masks, kept distance, limited purchases at stores, stopped travel, closed the churches. We started binge watching whole series, shared our favorites with friends, cleaned closets, started home-based projects. And when new vaccines became available, we waited for the call for it to be our turn. And Canada took some criticism for hoarding resources when the whole world needed them. And then there was pushback. The convoy to Ottawa protesting government overreach, angry at medical workers, border restrictions, vaccines, and masks, creating a month of noise, chaos, and intimidation in the capital. We saw the rise of race-based violence, particularly anti-Asian and anti-Semitic. And in this decade, a young teenager from Sweden invited a global community to take climate action seriously. She spoke to youth all around the world and addressed the United Nations with a speech to global leaders, pointing to inaction and empty words and leaving a world of young people to face the consequences. In her speech, she cried out, "How dare you?" Canada saw unprecedented forest fires and floods. And the sun was blocked out and our lungs burned, and we lived under a heat dome, the deadliest weather event in Canadian history. And David Attenborough made his most urgent and desperate plea for the life of the oceans. In the midst of these dire circumstances, the pushback has been greening projects that are happening around the world, from Bolivia to the Western Sahel, as people are working to reclaim land that has gone to desert and to plant trees that will capture carbon. The people are often partnering with Indigenous people and learning from their historic land practices. One of the most ambitious is China's Great Green Wall, which is a 70-year-long project to make a wall of trees around the Taklamakan Desert. The wall is intended to be 3,000 miles long and up to 900 miles wide in some places. They are learning lessons about careful partnering with local ecosystems and have already planted 66 billion trees. This decade has seen more openness and conversation about sexual orientation and gender identity. Protections were added into the Canadian Human Rights Act. School curricula talking about gender, gay-straight alliance clubs were formed. Communities were learning to be more inclusive, and individuals were feeling a new freedom to fully be themselves and express themselves authentically in society. And then the pushback. A new word for me, the manosphere. It grew out of men's rights and fathers' rights organizations, and it's attracted a variety of groups. It primarily speaks to young men who are looking for their place. The incels, the involuntarily celibate, who blame women and feminism for their lack of intimate partners. The men going their own way. People retreating from women specifically, and often society in general. The pickup artists, who teach men dating skills based mostly on deception, controlling behavior, and rigidly hypermasculine and feminine roles and requirements. Manosphere influencers promise men support and meaning, but they deny rights and respect to women, trans and non-binary people. They also advance a narrow idea of acceptable masculinity that puts harmful and rigid limits on what it means to be a man. In this era, pot was legalized, and stars made it available, popping up all over the country. Its legalization was a relief for many who enjoy pot smoking, but ongoing studies continue on chronic use and its impact on mental and physical health. British Columbia also decriminalized the possession of small amounts of hard drugs in the hope that it would allow those with severe addictions to seek help rather than jail. Opioid use became a crisis in this era and caused untold misery, desperation, and unpredictability in cities and reserves and small towns across the country. City libraries closed. Safe injection sites got overwhelmed. businesses found it increasingly hard to attract customers and staff. But toxic drugs continued to be readily available and fatal for 32,000 Canadians in this era. Churches continued to try to meet the most basic human needs like food, shelter, and clothing, but also found themselves saving lives by reversing overdoses, providing harm reduction supplies, and advocating for a safer drug supply. And this era has seen the rise of tent cities. In parks, downtown cores, rural walking trails, and grassy freeway medians all across the country. Their residents are not only people with addictions and mental illness, although people suffering those maladies are clearly there. The recent explosion of unhoused people includes a broader demographic than ever before. More families, more skilled workers, more senior citizens, and more newcomers to Canada. These difficult and dangerous communities point to the unaffordability of life in this time, and particularly of housing. Another thing that was legalized in this era was medical assistance in dying. Highly regulated and clearly defined, Canada opened the door to more choices about how the end of life could happen. The debate continues over access and alternatives and who can consent. We shared some significant deaths in this era. Queen Elizabeth II, Gordon Lightfoot, Gord Downey of the Tragically Hip, and Leonard Cohen, poets and singers who shared their gifts for decades. In this decade, an ancient mystery was solved. The ships from the Franklin expedition were found in the Canadian North, the Erebus and the Terror. They were sent out to find the Northwest Passage and found themselves trapped in the advancing ice in 1848. The ships were abandoned and all the sailors presumed dead. It was the worst disaster in British polar exploration. Both ships were found 10 years ago with a combination of scientific tracking and Inuit wisdom. The Inuit had generations of stories of seeing the boats frozen in the ice and then sinking over time. They led scientists and dive teams to the location. Also in the North, just last November, the Inuit people received an apology from the government for federal policies in the 50s and 60s to slaughter their sled dogs. It was a policy meant to force Indigenous communities into permanent villages and end their semi-nomadic hunting life. The dogs were essential to traditional life and travel and were perfectly adapted to the land to be strong and cold resistant. With the apology, some breeding pairs of dogs were reintroduced to the community to help heal and begin to restore the people. And further to healing and restoration, bison were recently introduced to Wanuskewin Park, north of Saskatoon, after mass slaughter and near extinction by 1880. This era is seeing some wrongs righted. Aeschylus was considered the father of the Greek tragedy more than 400 years before Jesus was born. And one of the enduring phrases of his was, "In war, truth is the first casualty. Truth has been a casualty in this decade. Whether you call it fake news, propaganda, conspiracy theories, gaslighting, truthiness, deep fakes, or alternative facts, we are being treated to a banquet of information that is hard to verify. What is true? What is real? An invasion happens in Ukraine. The combatants wear no identifying badges or flags or insignia. The Ukrainians say the aggressors are speaking Russian, but Russia says there are no troops there. An American president is elected twice, one who just says things, throws out numbers, historic events, and future plans that have no concept of reality. Whether people in leadership are hiding truths or actively making up lies, in this era, it's hard to know what is true, what is real. And artificial intelligence makes it even harder to know what's true or real. And while it has many positive and potential for life, the three greatest dangers of AI are misaligned values, harm at scale, and centralization of control. So AI doesn't have a moral compass. So if you ask it to slow or stop climate change, it might eliminate humans from the Earth, as we're the biggest contributors to global warming. So that's misaligned values. Harm at scale. AI can use weapons without human oversight or can destabilize societies with disinformation. And centralization of control. It can put all that power in the hands of a few companies or very wealthy individuals. How do I know these are the three greatest dangers of AI? I asked an open AI site on the web. What are the three greatest dangers of AI? And that's what it told me. So it must be true. In this decade, Twitter and TikTok made memes come alive. These are online group comments on culture or news. Following a 2018 MarketWatch article that implied an unrealistic amount of savings a person should have in their 30s, people on Twitter began responding to the article by sharing memes of all the things you should really have by the age 35. Like 40,000 avocado toasts set aside for retirement. For better or worse, the internet became the place that people looked for and found relationships. More weddings these days are for people who have met online. But users of these platforms find that it can also be a great place to get scammed, either from local or global bad actors. And churches who are notoriously slow to change were forced to do so quickly in the onset of the COVID pandemic. We had virtual worship services, coffee hours, talent shows, and meetings. And with the end of the emergency, we have kept it going. As much as we like to be together, people enjoy the ease of meeting together without worrying about traffic or parking. The United Church voted to change its structure in this time, to take out the middle-level presbyteries and just have larger meetings less frequently. It led to fewer opportunities for churches to gather and meet and share what we were doing. And we voted to establish an autonomous national indigenous organization, a native church separate from the church. They committed themselves to carry a common vision and dream, to respect everyone's story, to care for one another, to uphold community and build positive relationships. They wrote, We thank our ancestors and all our relations who have brought us to this moment. We are all spirit first. The work of right relations continues. We commit to moving forward together in a good way. It was a positive beginning, but we don't know how this is going to be in the future. Some people are already feeling a loss of connection with communities that have shared a church history between Indigenous and settler communities for 100 years. Some are excited but cautious, trying to figure out next steps. Some feel unsupported. We just don't know. In an earlier apology to residential school survivors, we ended the statement saying that we would support the Indigenous people going forward with our actions. But in considering what support and action looks like, we have seen the complexity of the issues before us. On issues like pipeline development and natural gas plants, Indigenous communities are not of one mind. And our participation as a church on one side or the other adds to the division that these communities are already suffering. We don't have all the answers, but we are keeping conversations going. In this era, there were anomalies found in historic residential school grounds across the West. There was much work to be done in BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan to connect with families whose children never came home from those schools. There is still much to be learned, accepted, and understood. But in Red Deer, Alberta, on the grounds of the Red Deer Industrial School, the remains of 4 children were discovered. That school that had been the home to a disastrous legacy of hunger, sickness, and death. In this decade, the United Church and Indigenous people held a reburial ceremony for those children whose bodies were found when the school site was being redeveloped. Relatives came down from further north in Alberta, people who would have been nieces, nephews, and cousins of those who died. Prayers were shared and songs and a peace pipe passed as we addressed this part of an historic wrong. Jane Baptiste, David Lightning, Georgina House, Sarah Sousay. More truth, more listening, and a path to share it together. And one thing the church wanted us to read in this era, well, we're not reading anymore. The church is releasing videos to share. And the most central ones are how to be an anti-racist church. During a general council meeting where discussion was about combating racism, Reverend Paul Wolfel rose to speak. He's an Alberta minister, originally from Jamaica, said the United Church doesn't have to just address racism out there because it is in here, in our own congregations and policies and attitudes and actions. He says there has been no call to the church to acknowledge the racism within it, to confront the racism within it, to transform or change white privilege, white entitlement, and racism. Jordan Cantwell, who was a moderator at the time, and on the power of Paul's words and some of the speakers that followed, she suspended the agenda of the meeting and invited the debate to continue, but only with speakers who were not white. And the microphones lined up with brown and black and Asian people, lay people and ministers telling painful stories about some of their experiences about being part of this church. A church that did not recognize its own biases, barriers, and assumptions about what this faith is and how we share it. So the church is designing a series of videos to help us become an anti-racist church. Maybe that can be our project to start in the fall. This conversation can make people very uncomfortable, but we're called into the places that Martin Luther King described as a beloved community. He said we need to act, acknowledge, confront, and transform. ACT. And a song written within this decade? Well, a new hymn book just came out a week ago called Then Let Us Sing. Global songs about struggle and engagement. It's going to be fun to challenge ourselves to sing a few new songs in the time ahead. So today we're going to sing my favorite one so far. It's called There's a Wild Hope in the Wind.